please join me in welcoming the one and only our friend, Congressman Darrell Issa. How's it going?
Boy, these lights are great. Can you turn them around the other way? I'm sure these folks would like to have the lights in their eyes.
So,
if you had a low-lux camera, if somebody would please develop a better low-lux camera so we would need these things.
So, you just got back from South by. How was it?
I haven't left yet.
You haven't left yet? Okay,
No,
great.
And until I shave this, I'm really still there.
Okay, that's fine. Did you have a fun time there, though?
I did. Anyone else here go to South?
We're not the cool people here.
Look, don't worry. Austin is crazy year-round. You can go at any time.
So it's funny because like every time people ask me how was South by, I always reply, it was fun from what I remember. So I'm glad you're here.
What do you remember?
I don't remember anything from there.
Oh, you had a good time.
Yes, I did have a good time. And I'm actually very surprised that you still have your voice, because there you have to like scream in people's ears because the music's so loud there.
I must admit, I was and it was well documented. At 12:03, I was still at the Consumer Electronics Association's party, which was also done with WeDC, and I suddenly realized I had no voice left, which was okay because nobody was really listening. So that's when I almost called it a night so I could catch my 7 o'clock flight.
Sure. So we always like to start on a personal note. We're going to go way, 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 way back. So where were you born? Where were you raised? What did your parents do? And
It was in a log cabin.
Okay.
Way back in the woods.
Sure. Okay.
As the folks that know me know, I went to a school that was 20 miles away in the snow. I had to walk uphill both ways. Now, actually, I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, truly Cleveland. Forget about all those suburbs. But when I was just about a teenager, we moved to Cleveland Heights, and I went through school there all the way until my 17th birthday and 0 days in which I enlisted in the Army, and off I went.
I think that's your phone. You can answer if you want. Okay.
No, Barack really doesn't want to know what I think. It could be Eric Holder. He's found Lois Lerner's emails.
All right, we're off to a good start. It's good. Let's keep it rolling. Let's keep it rolling.
I know those were your questions.
Yes, they were my questions.
You know what Henry Kissinger said at the height of... you've lost control. I just want you to know that.
Sure, no problem. All right, I'll sit back.
At the height of Watergate, they had nobody left that could go in front of the press because basically Nixon had sort of polluted the water with the press. And so they said, well, we'll send Henry Kissinger out because he was the most respected man in America. And I'm not being sarcastic. He really was. So they sent him out. And he, of course, he was Secretary of State. He had absolutely nothing really to do with anything related to the administration. So he went to the press and he looked them in the eye. And I recommend you all do this if you ever have a tough situation. And that is, you looked at the press and you say to them, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have questions for my answers. Now, that's a Henry Kissinger moment. Now, do you have one for me? Do you have questions for my answers?
Well, no, I don't. But, okay, so...
I've got answers for no questions.
Before we go into the direct electronic story, what was your first entrepreneurial experience as a child? That's always a good one.
Well, like most kids in my era, it was a paper route. And, it's actually a really bad model, because you break your back for very little money, and then you hope for the generosity of people who take pity on you. So you only go to collect your weekly collection of your dues, or of the fees. You only go to collect it on the worst rainy, snowy, rotten day. And you don't put a hat on or anything. You let it kind of ooze down here. So you look cold and pitiful, because that's the only way to get a better tip. Now, that's the entrepreneurial part of the newspaper business. Which, by the way, I'm using the same technique to get bills passed in Congress.
Okay. I mean, it would be you'll have a lot of success if you're in Seattle, because it rains there all the time, so.
No, there they'd be underwhelmed. I would probably go on a sunny day when people are going, what is that thing in the sky? I've been to Seattle, I can tell. There's a...
Hashtag startup grind at Darrell Issa. Okay, so start tweeting out. Usually what I do is I go through 4 or 5 hours of research videos of my.
I thought you were going to ask 4 or 5 hours of questions.
No, that's at South by.
But this time you're just winging it.
Yeah, I'm just I'm winging it, but I'm actually reading the questions off here. So after I'll do seriously 4 or 5 hours of video research, and after going through 15 minutes, not even 15 minutes, I was getting pretty nervous, because these are videos of you interrogating on your investigative hearing.
That must be why you got that look when I said I was going to ask the question.
Well, so that, because when you said that, cause I was like, I'm glad I'm asking all the questions, but I guess not. So, but let's just get straight into the directed electronics. So the Viper system. Talk about the founding days of this company, and what was sort of the aha moment? Why did you decide to be like, yes, I want to now start a car alarm system?
Oi. I'll take you through the longest short story you're ever going to hear, but I'll talk fast so we get through it. I left the Army in 1980. I joined a fellow who made other people's products as a contract manufacturer. How many of you have been a sub to somebody? Okay, then you felt my pain. The fact is, we were always a day late and a dollar short as far as getting paid. If the project succeeded, they took it away from us. If project started to fail, they shut us down. And if they ran short of money, they didn't pay us. And so it was a great business. But I did that wanting to launch my own product. And I ran through and tried to launch a couple of products, including I tried to make an FM amplifier booster. Turned out that the problem was not the making it, but distributing it successfully. There was no internet. And I had a customer, who was making an anti-theft device. And you've probably never seen one of these, but what would happen is you would turn on your ignition key, a little red LED would come on, you'd punch in a 4-digit code, and if you got the right code, you could then start the car. And if you didn't, you couldn't. And these guys were making so much money that they could buy the absolute best Coke. And they did. And I'm not no laughing. I mean, these folks squandered a very small fortune that they made very quickly, and then they had a problem, which was they had one bad batch of product, large batch, several 20,000, and suddenly they had all this product coming back. It was all defective, and it was all from Ford Motor Company, and Ford wanted it all fixed, and they didn't have any money, and the bank foreclosed on them because, quite frankly, the money had gone up their noses, and so I was the guy. I told you the story. I was the guy making product for them. And so I had equipment and know-how to make their product, and they're gone, and I've got inventory and know-how, and it was an incredibly profitable product. It was costing them about $9 to make something they were selling for $29, and they went broke doing it. And so I figured, what the heck, and I went to the bank and said, look, you keep the accounts receivable. All I want is the half-finished inventory. And I want to get a fair, and the tooling, which they were delighted to sell because it had absolutely no value. And I also got the great trade name. Is Phyllis still here? Okay. Steel Stopper, S-T-E-A-L, Stopper. Never could get people to think that it was an S-T-E-A-L and that we weren't stopping rust. But so I got a trademark, and I got the right to have all the angry customers with defects send it back to me. But it got me started. And quickly I discovered that this product could make us some money. But more importantly, I was in Cleveland, Ohio, and there was a fledgling radio frequency industry that had for years been making garage door operators. And I said, if we could just make a product small enough to put it in your pocket, we could change the industry, not have to drill holes in the car or open the car door. And so we went to work with some volunteer, or let me rephrase that, some moonlighting. They weren't volunteers, but they were working cheap. Moonlighting engineers, and we built a radio frequency product and began selling it. And we made a lot of money, and a couple years later, it actually began working. You do know that when you make a product early on, the early adopters buy it, and when it doesn't work, they pay you to fix it. Later on, you make a bulletproof product, and the later adopters, the Best Buys and so on, they send you it back when it's perfectly good and there's a new model and they want a full refund. So it's always good to be on the early part where people are forgiving of development. But we built a business that way. Went from 82 to 85 in Cleveland, then opened a West Coast operation, which made us much more hip, much higher tech, even though the product was still mostly being made in Cleveland. And the rest is history.
So, I mean, what's fascinating about, I mean, this is called Startup Grind. So, we know he's congressman, and we can talk about a lot of the other policy stuff. But this is where this story is like the gem of Startup Grind. So, I wanted to talk about that. But, you know, I actually had the Viper system on my car. So, anyone who has,
Were you an early adopter? Because if you are, I'm really sorry.
I was an early adopter.
You're a Viper. You were a later adopter.
Okay, yeah, that's right. But I actually had my Rice Rocket, and I had Viper in there. And so I actually absolutely loved it.
You have an MX-3, right?
I had an MX-6.
MX-6. That's still not a rocket.
I mean, it's...
I mean, that's like calling a candle
okay,
fireworks.
all right. So anyways, the story here
No, I just want to get to the truth, because, you know, it's important that a witness tell the whole truth. You're taking an MX-6 and calling it a rocket.
Okay, no.
You are a marketer. You could make money at this.
An aftermarket car that's a little bit more power. How about that? Is that better? So, anyways.
Hey, look, it's a Mazda. The Rice part was okay.
Right, okay. So, okay. So I actually had this extra feature on the car, which, and I love this part, but every time I got close to the car, it would say, you know, it's Captain America. It's like, protected by Viper, stand back. And
Very good.
So I thought that voice was a little cheesy, though, sometimes, but like.
It was my voice.
Was it? Really?
Yeah.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
So wait.
The French was my vice president, and the Spanish was a Mexican DJ. And the Japanese guy,
yeah,
they never bought it. The Japanese didn't want Japanese. They heard enough Japanese. They wanted English.
They wanted English, okay.
I was bigger in Japan than the Japanese guy, and you dissed me. Should we let him ask any more questions if he keeps this up?
Can you do me one favor?
Yes.
Could you repeat that line? Can you just do it for me?
Protected by Viper, stand back.
Oh my gosh, it is you.
You know, it's the only script I ever actually practiced for a long time. Do you remember the commercial?
Yes, I do.
Okay, the model was drop dead gorgeous, but the snake was the star.
Right.
Okay, and we showed that. How many of you have started figuring out where you're going to market your products and how you're going to gain a market, and whether you're going to do any, you know, media advertising? One thing we learned doing that was that because we didn't have a lot of money, so we started figuring out where can we put it. In Super Bowl, that's a couple $1 million even then. Where are we going to put it? So we put it on, the first two places we put it on, there were remnants, you know, sort of as space available. We put it on Black Entertainment Television, which was fantastic. And then we tried a bunch of others. The second best one we ever did was Cartoon Network. It turns out, for any of you that are moms or may someday be moms or stay-at-home dads, it turns out that when you're sitting there with your kids watching cartoons, you are desperate for the commercials. There's a question somewhere there.
That's a good one. So,
by the way, if you get Scalia, you're going to think I wasn't funny. So just, you know, there are much funnier people in my business.
We're going to get into serious topics very soon, but I had to ask this one question, though, about the alarm. So anybody this is the very famous car alarm system. It goes like this. It goes. You know that one? That's this guy right here. That's there. So how did you come up with such an annoying car alarm sound?
You know what's interesting is it was one of the areas in which we couldn't get good patent or copyright protection. What we did was we looked and said there are a number of sirens, and in Europe they tended to use a different siren. They used sort of the French, you know, sort of whatever you want to call it, the gendarme sound, which was like that. And so what we decided was that we could do one ASIC, and we could save a lot of money rather than having a bunch of discrete driver, because you could make a siren just using transistors to make that tone and capacitors. But we did an ASIC so we could do it. But as long as we were doing an ASIC, we said, why don't we make every possible combination? Well, we found out that there were 12 combinations, and we only had an ASIC that could do 6. So we picked the 6 that we thought were most popular. And if you bought the siren as a dealer, you could open it up and you could clip any of those tunes. So you could eliminate it. So you could make a 3-tone or a 1-tone or whatever. And we thought that depending upon where you were, people would choose a different tone. but we made them all string together if you didn't cut any wires. And you know, the stereo industry is an amazing industry. These guys will spend 4 days making a box for your woofer. But if you ask them to clip 2 wires to cut down the number of tones, they're not going to get around to it. So almost every siren left is a 6-tone siren, and we got known for the 6-tone siren.
Nice, nice. Okay, that's enough for the store. We'll get into really serious topics here. Hashtag startup grind at Darrell Issa. So you were a very successful you had a very successful entrepreneur career.
I bought low and sold high, yes.
Yeah, I mean, so the question here, I mean, this is the same question I asked Congressman Jared Polis after he sold, you know, Profile Flowers and Techstars. You could have just gone to the Bahamas and retired. Why did you decide to go into politics?
I already have a suntan, naturally. It was sort of the other way around. I got involved, as many people do, in local organizations. Chamber actually is how I came to testify on behalf of NAFTA back in the early 90s. And I got involved in the trade association, which became my trade association, merged into what is today the Consumer Electronics Association. And little by little, I just got involved in politics. And then, quite frankly, there was a guy, George Herbert Walker Bush, who lied to us. You know, read my lips, no new taxes. Okay, I mean, he's a politician. I guess you can't call it a lie. It's just a promise not kept. And it really engaged me in the idea that we should pick somebody better. You know, I'm a big Ronald Reagan guy because he underpromised and delivered everything he promised. You know, all he ever said was, you know, government's too big, taxes are too high, criminals need to be punished, and America needs to be strong if the world's to be free. And that's not his exact words, but that's all you have to remember about Ronald Reagan, because he didn't really get into the nuances of a lot of promises, but he delivered very well. George Herbert Walker Bush thought it was voodoo economics, and as soon as he got the presidency, he began selling out Ronald Reagan's vision of ending class warfare and so on. Those kinds of things, when you've gone from being a have-not to being a have, really bother you. I don't mind the high taxes. I mind being vilified while paying the high taxes. And that got me very engaged. It's what makes me a Republican. High taxes versus low taxes don't define me. Vilifying the greatest producers of wealth, well, in fact, they're the greatest philanthropists and they're the greatest contributors to the payment of running our government and the future success for our families, is so un-American that I just kind of caught the bug and never gave up.
Okay. That's a fair answer. So we're going to get right into the first topic here, patent reform. You have 37 patents to your name. You've been on both sides.
I've got a Chinese patent. Anyone want it?
I do, convince me.
It's not respected in China, but you can have it.
Sure.
I'll put it on the wall.
So you were on both sides of the table, a plaintiff, a defendant as a patent holder. Now you are the chairman of the, and I have to read this because it's a very long one, Subcommittee of Courts, Intellectual Property, and the Internet. So what are you sort of addressing these well-funded patent trolls who sort of exploit these loopholes and sort of coaxing, they coax inventors to go in litigation with like these big companies? Like what are you doing with these like patent trolls?
Well, first of all, if you walk the halls of Congress and people know what you do, what ends up happening is people walk up to you to lobby you impromptu, and it's just part of being a member of Congress. And I never expected the lobbying I've gotten the last month and a half, which is the standard line where someone walks up to me and says, "I'm a small businessman, and your patent reform is going to kill me." And you look and you say, "Well, what part of it?" And after a couple of questions, you realize this is a patent troll. His small business is, in fact, buying up or licensing patents and then suing people with, quick, anywhere from a $50,000 grab to a $500,000 grab, anything that is less than the cost of litigation. Again, Phyllis is here. If she has to advise a client, as innocent as pure as the driven snow, to use an old term, no matter how innocent you are, she has to explain to them that it's going to cost you $500,000 to get through X part of the case, a very best case. And under current law, your privilege of winning and being completely innocent is you pay Fish and Richardson, the amount agreed to by the hour. You lose and you're in deep kimchi. So what do? You write that $500,000 check. Those of you, and many of you came up to me, that are small startup companies. In your case, this is a form of ransom that can actually stop your company, because you've got to pay them in order to not be destroyed. And if you're doing well in your early stages, you literally can stifle your company's growth, because what they want, you've got to pay right away. And in some cases, they want an onerous license. But at the end of the day, you don't have the money to defend, and defending isn't cheap. So that was the big surprise that you didn't ask about. But like Kissinger, I had an answer for your question.
Sure, no problem. No, but I mean, don't you think that that startups and inventors are actually part of the problem? And what I mean by that is, and this is anecdotally, and also the startups that I've heard, but they'll actually have the patent trolls, and they'll come to them and say, "Hey, let's go in this together. Let's go into litigation together. We'll split it 50-50, whatever it may be, and then let's go take that patent and go after the Google and the Twitter, or whatever it may be." Don't you think there should be sort of safeguards to the interaction of the startups and the patent trolls? Because what ends up happening, from what they've told me, is they will like drag on the process, and then the patent troll's like, "Hey, it's taking a long time, so let's just don't you want this $20,000? We'll just give it to you, and then we'll take care of the rest." And then that seems like a very easy out for them, and they'll just give it. And then what you end up doing is they're stockpiling their patent portfolio. So what do you think about that?
And I keep using Phyllis because she was, unfortunately, she just let me know who she was and where she was and who she worked for and who she's been with. But, Dean Kamen, who she has a history with, can be easily defined as a troll. He invents things that he isn't going to actually make in many cases, that some other company or industry needs, and he offers it to them. And if they take it, he licenses them, and if they don't take it, he sues them. That's just the way it goes. He's not a troll. He's an inventor who looks at where industries are going and makes wonderful decisions and has a great track history. So whether you're the inventor or somebody who is facilitating the inventor getting their just due, there's nothing wrong with it. The question is, where is the line on the abuse? And when there's an abuse, how do we fix it? The current patent reform bill is really a tort reform bill. And we have so many Democratic sponsors that we're always a little careful when we use the word tort reform, because we don't want to lose any of them. But coming up with in the most egregious cases, the loser, so to speak, pays. The frivolous plaintiff in most cases would end up paying. That changes the dynamics. Now, it's not in every case. It's not just because you lost. It's because you brought a meritless case. And the worst trolls have a vague patent that probably barely it resembles the product they're suing on. But they say, do you feel lucky, or do you want to give me X amount of dollars? Those people we're dealing with in patent reform in two really important ways. One is, in really frivolous cases, loser pays. In the other case, we're requiring that they show what their patent does and why it reads on the product. And that claim-by-claim construction of the product gets you so fast to a markman, so fast to a re-exam that shows that they're now reinterpreting their patent. And trolls do this on behalf of inventors all the time. They essentially stretch the patent to where if somebody takes that patent back to the patent office, they're going to say, well, if that's what you think it means, then it's invalid based on this prior art. So we're trying to create the tools to balance so that legitimate patent holders still can get their day in court and still can get their fair compensation, but we get rid of the top section that makes it so lucrative for trolls to operate.
So, I mean, I guess what you're referring to is part of the Innovation Act covered business method, where
it's
a little bit different.
That's just a little different.
Okay, so let's talk about that one, because I think that again, this CBP or CBM of the Innovation Act, what it does, it allows the PTO the ability to reject infringement claims that are like bad quality. Just kind of reading this right off Wiki, so I don't know what it really means. But bad quality patents, and then
remember, it was written by either side. So
is it? Okay. But raise the bar on the quality of patent submission, including that would also include software patents. I mean, don't you think like this CBM will make it harder for startups to get patents? I mean,
Yes, it will. But let's ask the real question. Do you want a patent so that you bet the ranch, your credit cards, and the money you borrowed from your parents, only to find out on re-examination 4 or 5 years later that you don't have what you thought you had? Or do you want a patent certainty, either at time of application and grant, or on first look early on in the first time you try to assert it? Do you want to get a fair understanding of what your patent really gives you? The sooner you get that, the sooner you have a very strong tool to use either in your own production or for licensing. So, certainty of patents is not about whether they get re-examined. Certainty of patents is, do we get them right? Do they really mean it? How many in this room have applied for a patent? Okay, I'm going to use you. You've applied for a patent. Did you want more than have you gotten the patent? It's been granted. Okay, so you applied for a patent.
he's a City Pass member, but I said please be kind to him. He's a VIP.
No. Nice try. You took the front row. You applied for a patent, you got a patent. Did you get everything you originally wanted? Was it as broad as your original first-time claim?
Yeah.
Okay. And if somebody showed you that you missed a piece of technology, would you feel you were entitled to something even though it was invented by somebody earlier? No.
Right. After I tried to market it, it didn't really have any market.
I had those too. Yeah. Yeah. My best ideas didn't sell any product. Fortunately, my mediocre ideas did well. But the fact is that most patent applications end up slightly narrower than when they went in, and that's even when you did a good novelty search, you sort of understood the prior art. But as soon as you accuse a competitor, they do a really extensive look, and they often find new prior art. That's where we're trying to, and we did this in the Leahy bill, earlier on. What we're trying to do is facilitate the patent office, if they don't get it right the first time, get it right as soon as possible and free up the Article 3, the district courts, from endlessly having judges who are not patent lawyers, who almost never came up through that process, try to decide these cases. Or worse than that, bless their hearts, a jury of 12 people picked specifically because they didn't know about the subject matter. I mean, the jury selection is all about taking out the people that might understand it. That's part of what the attorneys in the case do as litigators. So if you can get a patent examiner who already looked at your patent or equivalent, look at it again in light of new discoveries, you get the best re-examination, and that's what we should want. So as a small inventor, I'd love to have a lot of patents, but I need patents I can depend on.
So in other words, write good patents, right? We make good patents, right?
Well, if you're going to produce a product, the novelty search, your search of the prior art, is more important to you so that you, one, don't infringe somebody else's patent, you don't design your product into somebody else's patent, and in fact, the protection you get is the protection that you can depend on. And it's amazing, if you plan on making the product, you care so much about the history. And you can see this in patent applications, because the person who's going to practice the art in their initial filing has gone through, they've gone to the old IBM, or in old days you used to have to buy them from the patent office in paper and read them, but they've gone through and they've done these novelty searches, and they've really looked at the prior art, and they've included all of it and said why their product is different or inventable over the expired or unexpired art. And then you look at the guy who just came up with this great idea that he's going to have a Bluetooth device that does X. I happened to look at one recently. And so he's invented this great new, if you will, extension to Bluetooth. And none of the Ericsson patents are in there. And I'm going, how could you invent something that expands on Bluetooth and never notice the people who actually invented it? And yet this patent came through that way. And as a result, I don't think this patent survives even the smallest of scrutiny in the long run, but it did get granted.
So shifting gears here, because we can talk like literally all day on patent reform. I wanted to get...
Sadly, so can
I know. But so you had recently created a congressional caucus of the Internet of Things. This was with Congresswoman Del Beni. which we had her as a guest,
You've had Suzanne here before me?
and Jared. Yeah.
And Jared.
Yeah.
So I was like, do I round this out,
We
or
were
there
leading
are
up to
peop-
you. We were
are
leading
there-
up to the
oh,
king.
that is,
How about that?
that is no. Actually, they are truly great partners to have, and Jared and I are personal friends, and sort of we're part of the actual we made it and signed the front of a paycheck caucus. Okay. So it's a small caucus. We meet in a phone booth.
Sure. But I want to talk about this Internet of Things caucus. Basically, it's focusing on educating members on the innovation in the space, and also in the Internet of Things encompass industries such as healthcare, transportation, home, and workplace. So what do you think is the biggest thing you want to be accomplished by this caucus?
I think we want members to understand what is possible and what roles the federal government has had historically in some cases facilitating, but in many cases stifling. A good example, and this is not specifically our mandate, but it's certainly included. You've all heard probably about the auctioning of spectrum, right? You hear about that. Okay, billions of dollars paid by Verizon and AT&T and Dish Networks and all these folks, all great. And every congressman thinks, oh, the greatest thing in the world is to not have to tax people. I can get this money to take care of whatever pet projects I want and close the budget deficit. All that may be fine. How many of somebody back here, all the way in the back, somebody in the back, tell me what spectrum carries more data than any other spectrum? Nice guess. How about our Wi-Fi connected products? Wi-Fi carries more data than cellular. The reality is that 802.11 products, that spectrum, relatively small amount of spectrum, is carrying huge amounts of data. It's carrying it in small businesses, large businesses, carrying the homes. Your cell phones, probably most of you, unless you have an all-you-could-eat plan and really big batteries, you quickly get them onto Wi-Fi whenever you can because it's quicker, you move the data, and it's comparatively free. And yet that spectrum is the hardest spectrum to get expansion in. Why? Well, it doesn't raise any money for the government. Well, in fact, it raises our economy in huge amounts. The Internet of Things is going to depend on that type of spectrum. Wi-Fi spectrum, Bluetooth spectrum, perhaps white space spectrum. In the near future, and I started in radio frequency, sadly, before most people in this room were born, but when I started in spectrum, you had all kinds of interference problems. What I'm talking on right here absolutely needed very clear space. Today, you can operate 1,000 devices that all can look at not just signal to noise, but actual data, and they can fit their bits in between other bits and help fill in the spectrum so that you're getting more and more transmission spaced in a way in which they're non-interfering. To be honest, that's part of what cellular is all about, is going up and saying, can I use this, can I use this? We will, in the foreseeable future, be able to take, huge gigahertz bands and tell a whole bunch of people that they can play in that bandwidth as long as they agree not to interfere with somebody else. And in the two-way communication, you can do that. You can find out. That's not in the mindset of the FCC, and it's not in the how many billions can we get for selling spectrum. If we sell out all the spectrum and we don't leave spectrum for the common user, we're going to miss the innovation that will come from billions of connected products.
So that's interesting that you're talking about the spectrum side of Internet of Things. Let's talk about the security side of Internet of Things. There's no minimal, security requirements out there right now for these devices. I don't know if you saw, and again, the security part of Internet of Things. I don't know if you saw the 60-minute episode with Leslie Stahl when they had interviewed Dan Kaufman. They call him DARPA Dan, and he basically demonstrated how he hacked into a production car right now in the market. He hacked into the car and literally got in control of the car, the headlights, the windshield, the car alarm. Not Viper, probably not.
No, is that factory thing junk? Real junk.
Okay. But and then here's the thing. He basically hit a button, and the car accelerated really fast. And then Leslie Stahl was like metal to the pedal, trying to stop the car. She couldn't, and then until he hit cancel. then stop the car. I mean, isn't this kind of stuff that the caucus should be probably looking at, the security side of the Internet of Things? I mean, it's kind of dangerous, don't you think?
No. Now, look, in a free market, if people want to make bad products, the market addresses that. And the auto industry is not a free market. It's incredibly regulated. So the government is very engaged in that. Now, the Federal Trade Commission will go after you if you say something's secure and it's not. As a matter of fact, they'll go after you if you just get hacked. If any of you have websites or internal networks, no matter where they're located, if you get hacked, the Federal Trade Commission may come back in and punish you a second time. You've already had your data stolen and used, but if personally identifiable information disappears, the FTC will come in and sue you basically and force you into a consent decree that'll cost you a lot of money. The government is already there doing that. The real question is the government allowing innovative ideas that may or may not need encryption? Okay? You know, let's just assume that you could throw 1,000 specks of dust up in the air, and all those specks of dust were networking with each other in an open format, and they were delivering you the information on the humidity and any wind, any air direction, and they were telling you about other particles there, and you go, wow, that's really cool. If your first reaction is, how do you lock it down? And you understand, an automobile is one of the most locked down items for a lot of reasons. Those microprocessors go through endless tests. They're minus 40 to plus 40. They bombard them with an amazing amount of electricity as a matter of course, greater than a lightning strike on the car. All of that goes on in the testing, and yes, you can hack them. But you know what? That's what my company does for a living, my old company. Because the days of the Viper alarm being a standalone and then plugging into wires is long since passed. My company, quite frankly, reads the body computer and the engine control computer. It finds what those signals are, it duplicates those signals, and it works with those signals in a reactive way. And if you buy, and I don't own the company anymore, this is not a paid announcement, you're free to buy a
Family Trust owns it though, right?
No. Once it went public and then private, completely out of it. No, it's, I get absolutely no money. I just get the pride of the place where they have my baby pictures, still being happy. But, so, one of the real questions is, what did he prove? He proved that if you have access, he didn't have remote access, he didn't get this through the air, he got access to the data bus and he started reading the data bus. Yes, you can do that. As a matter of fact, I'll go to another one, and this is an Internet of Things question. Back in 94, 95 timeframe, we lobbied Congress to allow 128-bit and above encryption. Because at the time, companies like Microsoft and other software companies, because they couldn't encrypt to 128-bit, people were stealing their software and putting it out on the internet as shareware, as though they owned it. And Microsoft, at the time one of the leaders, went so far as to export their software in raw form to Israel, where they would pay for 128-bit encryption, which was there, and then bring it back, because there was no prohibition to having it. You just couldn't do it in the U.S. And this was based on your government being able to spy on you. And Congressman Mike Oxley, a former FBI agent, was leading the charge to make sure the FBI could still look at all your stuff. And so you're creating a disaster for free enterprise by trying to protect the FBI's ability to do something. Now, the FBI eventually could crack 128. They just want to be able to crack it quickly. The Internet of Things has to say, going back to your point, that we want to make sure we protect private enterprises' decision not to encrypt in some cases, but very much to encrypt and to protect in a way in which DARPA Dan couldn't crack it. Right now, your government would tell General Motors, no, you can't get that encrypted. You can't get so encrypted that we can't read where that car's been and what it's done without the owner's permission.
Okay, want to shift gears again. Let's talk about immigration.
You're still on cars if you're shifting gears. That rice rocket thing is just never going to go away.
Never going to go away, okay. So,
was it manual?
Yes, it was. It was
I was
manual.
afraid you were going to
No,
say.
it was. I got.
I was afraid
I'm
he was
not
going to
that
say he had
stupid.
a
It was
rice
manual.
rocket that was an automatic. You just saved yourself.
I know. So the immigration, you had, I don't know if it was a proposed bill, but to
Skills
increase,
Visa Act.
right,
The
and that
Skills
was
Visa Act passed out of committee. It was a real bill.
what was the bill that proposed 166,000 H-1B visas?
That's the
Versus-
Skills Visa Act.
Okay, got it. And then, so are you going to go at it again? Are you going to try to?
You damn right.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Sure.
How would that? What is your opinion about how we could recruit top talent, right, from countries, foreign countries where they have a startup and they want to come over here, and we want to bring them here so that they don't have to compete against us later. Do you have like legislations that are doing that right now?
Well, Skills Visa Act is still online. You can read it. The last year's bill, I'll just put it in perspective. Last year's bill, which passed out of the committee but not out of the House, but we expect to do both this year, primarily took the 1.2 million people that we already allow to immigrate here permanently, and said out of that, about 10%, a little over 100,000, we would like to shift from blind dumb luck, the lottery and some of the family reunification categories, mostly sibling reunification, and we want to move it to the best and the brightest. Particularly, I wanted to make sure that if you graduate from an American university with a master's or PhD in science, math, engineering, that you would be able to remain here. Not a terribly absurd thing. Let's see, you're smart, proven accomplishment, and we're deporting you. That shift of just keeping the best and the brightest, bringing them in some cases, was only about 100,000 people. But that shift scored $1.8 billion. Now, I know that's not a lot of money to some of you more senior entrepreneurs, but that's over 4 times what the so-called Ryan Murray budget did. It is a huge amount of revenue to the federal government in the first 10 years. That's how we score things, is in 10 years. But the CBO said, well, here's what it'll happen in the second 10 years. This is not dynamic scoring. This is based on documentable differences in the two demographics. The second 10 years, it does over $500 billion. It continues to grow our economy at such a high rate that the revenue to the government grows at that rate. Obviously, the growth to the economy is far greater. And it's not dynamic, so it's not assuming that these people start up companies and grow our economy and make us competitive. It's simply looking at what the average college graduate with those degrees makes in income and thus pays taxes. It doesn't even look at driving down the unemployment rate, driving up America's exports, any of that. So the real benefit is huge. And again, it's a modest change. We allow more people to immigrate to this country than all the rest of the world combined every year. We are the most generous, more generous in immigration than all the rest of the world combined. So I didn't try to change the number. I tried to change what the numbers did. If I could have done twice that, I would have. And to be honest, and this goes to a basic character flaw of mine, I totally support the brain drain of the rest of the world into America. That's our history of why we're so successful. We're a country of immigrants. Not all those immigrants had degrees, but they all had more ambition than the people who stayed behind. And that's why our country has done so well, that in combination with the freedom to do what we do in America.
Actually, there's a statistics that says that 40% of the Fortune 500 companies were started by immigrants. And then 60% of the high-tech companies were started by immigrants or children of immigrants. So it's very important, obviously. I wanted to talk about Startup Day across America. How can we get involved as startups here? What is it? And and how can we get involved?
Well, I'm going to get Ellen over here, and she's going to answer all your questions. She's waving. She's sitting there with come on over here. No. There's some questions that are really important. The fact is that startups create jobs in America. This common statement that small business creates X amount of jobs, is actually somewhat of an inaccuracy. Startups are small businesses. So an old small business doesn't create new jobs. New small businesses do. And that's the message that we want to have. And everyone who understands that sometimes it's creative destruction, sometimes it's a new innovative area that's something you're not in. Everyone needs to look at it as an opportunity to join and get involved. Ellen, did you have something else on this? Because you've been so silent, and you came all the way here and didn't even drink a beer.
Dozen members participate last year. We actually had a billboard in New York City give us a shout out. It's becoming a big event, and happy to have anyone.
Ellen, take the mic.
Yeah.
Because that way you're not on camera, but at least you're heard by the camera.
Yeah.
Happy to have anyone participate. It's hugely important that we get members involved. So contact me, contact your local accelerator, 1776 partners. They've always been fantastic in helping us connect members with startups. And so looking forward to having you guys involved.
So I have a suggestion. So what Startup Day is they they enlist members of Congress to sign up so they can go back to their district and then get involved, like for one day, just go into the 1776 of their city and be present and actually interact with the startup. So my proposal would be, can we get these members of Congress to do fireside chats with Startup Grind in each of these cities?
You're going to do 5 hours of
No, not
research
me.
on each of them?
No, we have 167 chapters all over the world, including about 50 in the United States. We'd love to do fireside chats with them.
Well, and I would love you to do fireside chats with them, but the one thing I've learned about the 540 members of the House and Senate, including the delegates, is they're each individually elected and led by no one. But I'll certainly encourage them to do it.
Okay, great, awesome. We got you on camera. So before we open up to Q&A, which we have 10 minutes, what is this is the topic that I always ask my speakers. What is your opinion about DC Tech? I mean, you spend quite a lot of time here. You're from California. What could we do better as a community, as an ecosystem that you see work on the West Coast?
Well, what works on the West Coast works in spite of our government. So the fact is California throws away more business than most states have. Rick Perry used to come around California and brag about taking jobs out of California. He never took any jobs out of California, just explained that Texas had no tax and California was taxing him to death. So, why did they leave? They left because California was telling them to leave. California has no incentives other than we still have great universities. We still are a draw for great minds. And most importantly, California's past success keeps California succeeding. The fact is, people want to be where they network with people successful. The healthcare, for example, in San Diego, where obviously telecom, healthcare, bio, we're known for a lot in San Diego. Well, Qualcomm represents sort of a linchpin for all the telecom. Their success all the way back when they were Linkabit has kept us way ahead of most other areas. Our bio, we're third. Pharma, we're in the top 5. But a lot of it goes back to Scripps. It goes back to Salk. It goes back to some early people who either chose to be there later in their careers or came out of the UC system. So Washington has a problem. You don't have a great research hospital. You don't have research hospital. You don't have a great research university. You don't have many of the things that would inherently make you like a Stanford satellite or a UCSD satellite. And that's one of the challenges. So you have to find alternative ways. 1776 is a good example of saying you can do it in DC, even though nobody would have normally thought of that. And I will tell you, when you look at San Francisco, not the Silicon Valley, but San Francisco and Washington have tremendous common denominators. These are places in which everything's expensive, and yet, if your startup doesn't need a lot of space, it is going to employ few people, but be able to pay them well, then a really creative urban environment can work. And so the one thing I'd say to innovators in DC is figure out whether your innovative ideas fit what you're dealing with here. Do not try to do, and I had a friend who did this. He actually was in the car security system, and he was manufacturing in D.C. Bless his heart, the great people, but they finally eventually moved to Virginia because this simply was not a place to solder printed circuit boards in volume. So look at your product and say, does it fit that requirement? Relatively small workforce, the urban environment is very positive. You're more interested in a brain trust and communication than you are with hard assets that you can have delivered, shipping docks and so on. And most importantly, if you really need a nexus to a university and to those fertile minds, you may want to choose a place in which a university or a town already has that. I mentioned that my radio frequency products, I could never have started the Viper division that became what we're best known for if I hadn't had people who knew more about producing little super het and super rate regenerative receivers and how to make an oscillator into a transmitter that went 300 feet. That technology was known by people that were working days for the garage industry and nights for me. So there's got to be a better question than that answer.
So yes, we're going to open up the Q&A. So first of all, whoever our City Pass members or VIP.
Phyllis is entitled to ask a question
yes,
just because I mentioned her so often.
Yeah. Do you have a question, Phyllis? Okay. Anybody has a question here? All right. So
Jerome.
Yes, Jerome. Hi.
By the way, I can't see any names past that, so you're it for the night.
You've discussed how you think government's probably too invasive, often in terms of business needs. How do you strike the balance in legislation that is not too invasive, but is still practical and, say, tailored to whatever you're trying to accomplish?
Well, it's a little bit like that very, very bad joke about the Supreme Court, where they defined pornography as you'll know it when you see it. You know, you measure based on what the Constitution says. You measure based on, are we the appropriate, and I'm talking about federal, are we the most appropriate place to do something? In other words, do we have a right to do it at the federal level? Are we the most appropriate way? And then lastly, you know, is it the most efficient? So the test has to follow some of those. There are plenty of good ideas that people will say, hey, that's a great idea. There's only one question is, does everything that government does strip away individual liberty, and on what basis do we have the right to do it? The federal government has very explicit limitations, and one of them is that we have the right to, for common defense, yes. To promote the common good, yes. But we also have limitations, which is just because it's a good idea doesn't mean we have the right to take your money and your liberty in order to do a good idea. Davy Crockett, who I guess died at the Alamo, was very well known for objecting to taking tax money to pay for pensioning of widows. And his whole point was, this is public money being taken for private charity, and we can't provide charity to all, and yet we're taking your money to provide charity to some. And we've lost track of that sometimes, so yeah. My whole question is, why are we doing it at the federal level? That's the first question. And a good example is Medicaid was a state program with federal assistance. Under Obamacare, Medicaid became a 100% paid for program for the first 3 years and 90% thereafter. If you're getting 90% of the money from the federal government, aren't you in fact effectively just spending the federal government at state level? And why did we move health care to CMS as a cure-all with their track record? The answer is their track record sucks. They have not shown that they can drive down cost and increase efficiencies or innovation, and most innovation comes in private sector, often from private companies who are trying to deal with their cost of healthcare. Those would be some examples.
Okay, we got time for one more question. Phyllis, you don't have a question? She has to take it. Here we go, Phyllis.
I'm wondering what your view is on legislative-led patent reform versus court-led patent reform. What the judges are doing versus what the legislators are doing.
Let's see. I had the chief administrative officer in my office today, and we had a little bit of that discussion since he replaced Judge Bates, who wanted to go back to the court. And I was happy to have Judge Bates go back to the court because he's such a good jurist. Look, judges have an extremely important job, and that is to deal with the cases as they come to them. And often when you deal with a case as it comes to you, you make decisions that define the law through case law. And I'm all for that. As a matter of fact, case law often shows us where we've failed to do something right or failed to define something, because sometimes they have to find a certain way when in fact it's a gaping flaw. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples. Broadcom sued Qualcomm in the International Trade Commission, the ITC. Kodak sued Apple in the ITC. Now, to get to the ITC, what you say is, I'm a domestic entity, and this sleazy importer is importing product in that violates, in this case, patents, and if you don't stop them, there's no other recourse. Now, these companies had enough billions of dollars in the bank to buy New Jersey with Chris Christie. It was absurd for them to be there trying to get an exclusion order, particularly after the eBay decision, which I think was a good, well-thought-out position done by the courts. We now have a challenge. Are we going to have domestic companies in an international venue using it to circumvent Article III courts? That requires us. No judge in the ITC has the authority to just not take a case. The Article III judges can't do a whole lot about people going outside of them to an administrative court. That clearly is us. When judges in Tyler, Texas and Marshall, Texas, one judge alone has like 10% of the cases, and he always finds for the plaintiffs. And he never seems to think that the venue is inappropriate no matter what the documents show. Or at least he doesn't think it until they're so far in the case that he doesn't let it go. Now, that judge is not impeachable, but that judge is clearly filling hotels and the Chamber of Commerce's work more than the American people's. A legislative fix is the only fix, because the courts themselves, all the way through the Supreme Court, don't have the tools to rein that in. So those are examples. But an example is and there are not a lot of lawyers in the room, hopefully, but you look at Rule 11 sanctions. If you do something really unreasonable in a case, and the other side pleads a Rule 11 because you've absolutely thwarted all the rules and probably lied, the odds are you'll get away with it. But if they actually prevail, the judge will probably slap you with less than it costs to file that claim against you. That's the reality. So sometimes judges do so poorly with the tools they have that when we look and say, if a troll brings a really frivolous case, we not only want to give the tools, but we want to make sure the tools are used. So if they find that a case was without merit, or a pleading was without merit, then it's not you may, but you shall then award fees. And the difference between may and shall is, if we say shall, we'll get it done. If we say may, judges will deal with like Rule 11 sanctions, and plaintiffs who bring really frivolous cases most of the time will not pay the price of it. So those are some of the balancing acts. Sometimes it's observing what the court's doing. Sometimes the court actually shows us what they have limitations. But I'm not big on letting things get fixed that are essentially evolving law, and I don't think the Supreme Court is either. They would like us to define statute, and then they will interpret it and do the Constitution. So I'm in between the two positions, because I do see merit, and when we're in between legislative fixes, often some very good ones come out of decisions of the court. But as you know, even if they go through the Fed Circuit, even if they go to the Supreme Court, they're still narrow in their interpretation, and they very often, a slightly different twist that could be covered by a statute is not covered by a court decision, and then you go through it again. Now, I'll take one more question, because you're really not in control. So you had a question, and I think you ought to get it. You can close it out, but don't screw it up.
So there are a lot of trade associations. Is there a trade association or a lobbying group that are for entrepreneurs?
Again, look, NFIB and some of the other groups that try to represent small business do a pretty competent job. They try. On the far end, the chamber doesn't do squat for you. They're just too big and controlled by large enterprises. Some organizations, like the one I belong to, the Consumer Electronics Association, promote small business. I mean, when I joined the board, I was doing like $12 million, and I was a board member sitting next to Sony and Panasonic at the board table. You know, they threw away more stuff by accident than I produced. And so empowering small businesses, giving them a seat at the table, sometimes having it, is a little different. What industry are you going to be in? You don't know. Okay, then I'd stay away from wasting your money on joining a trade association right away. But you know, often it really boils down to what association are you want to be in, what fits your needs. You know, one of the things that trade associations do for small businesses is not lobbying Congress, that's important and all that, but no, what they often do is they're standard setting organizations, and they facilitate your getting into a business and understanding the rules of the road at a fraction of the cost of any other way. So, you know, if you're just looking at starting in business, what I would say is you want to visit conferences put on by nonprofit trade associations in areas of your interest and take advantage of some of the best and the brightest bigger companies, established companies that are there talking about the industry, their needs, and so on, because that can be very helpful to an entrepreneur who hasn't yet fashioned what they're going to do but wants to understand what they're up against. And don't worry about the industry. There's a kind of an odd named guy named Elon Musk, and you know, he decided to take on the financial giants with PayPal. He followed up by taking on the ultimate giants of the auto industry, and while he's doing that, he decides he's going to take on a 70-year-old business that was upcharging the cost of putting things in space year after year, and prove that he could make a profit delivering for 40% less rockets into space. Don't worry about how big the industry is. Sometimes the biggest industries have the fattest profits and the most opportunity for an entrepreneur. But do your work by going and taking advantage of what's cheap or free with a trade association before you even worry about that, since you're at that point of your business. And all other free advice is worth what you paid for it here tonight. Thank you.
Well, we got one more question. One more question.
Oh, okay.
One more question. Well, there was two, but we don't have time for two, so we got one more left. Who is your favorite superhero or historical figure, and why? So you can go to the historical figure if you want.
That's an easy one, but a hard one. The most current historic figure that I admire because of the simplicity I mentioned earlier would be Ronald Reagan. Now, I will give one piece of credit. Ronald Reagan quoted Churchill all the time, not always giving him credit. So a lot of what made Ronald Reagan great was he knew the great quotes of the past and some of the great anecdotal thoughts of the past, and he brought them into the future. So Ronald Reagan's my favorite, and I have lots of pictures and portraits of him because I believe he reduced so many great ideas of others into things we could all embrace.
Okay, so obviously I had asked the question before, and your assistant got it right. So we usually...
Ellen, did you rat me out?
It was actually Katie.
Oh, Katie rats me out all the time.
So we have a gift for you, and usually what I do is I go online to look for it. We had to create a poster for you, but I actually end up checking the wrong thing because it's a cardboard poster, but it's Ronald Reagan saying, well, Congressman Issa, you rock.
Thank you. This is great.
You can put this in your office. Thank you for coming out. We really enjoy your inspiring story.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Darrell.